Okay, hi. I'll start again. My name is Chris Taniguchi Kwan. I lead the ecohydrology research program at SWRCB. I'm also on a part of the CEF technical team and really happy to be here today to fill in for Dan. Um, okay, so I think the first item that we have, are there any new members that are here? If so, feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the group. No new members? Okay, well, if you don't want to speak or introduce yourself, feel free to say hi in the chat as well. Um, yeah, just a reminder that this meeting's being recorded. So if you're not speaking, if you can please mute yourself. And then if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat or raise your hand or yeah, unmute and ask questions. So we have a pretty short agenda today. The main presentation today is going to be by Laura Reed and Mustafa Al-Kurdi from Upstream Tech. So they're going to be giving a presentation on the development of a new California-wide daily historical flow data set. So we're really excited to hear about the completion of their work and this new data set that's going to be widely available to everyone across the state and beyond. So I know we're a little bit ahead of time, but we can get started with that presentation. If Laura, are you online? Or Mustafa?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think Laura's just running a couple minutes late, but we can certainly get started. Yeah, and yeah, maybe to introduce myself. Yeah, my name is Mustafa Al-Kurdi, and I'm one of the machine learning modeling engineers at Upstream Tech, and I have a background in environmental engineering. And I work very closely with this project that has been very exciting to work on and produce, as Chris said, a statewide data set of reach scale predictions over the last 20 years. So let me share the slide deck I have. All right. Well, so the goal of this project was to generate two data sets, one for the statewide rescale daily unimpaired flows predictions over a 20-year period. So those are meant to represent natural flows. Oh, audio is choppy.
Here, Mustafa, do you want me to do this one and maybe your audio will?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. I'm running a little late from an interview. Okay. So, hi, thanks for coming. And I will just skip all the intros. I'm Laura. I work on the hydro forecast team. And yeah, we're excited to be here talking about this work. So yes, what we have done is we've actually delivered the two final data sets of daily unimpaired flow predictions and daily what we call actual flow predictions for about 20 years. And those are statewide. They are on the NHD plus reaches. And the goal, sort of the next steps of that, and I don't know, Bronwyn and Kirk, if you're here, but are to put these through the functional flows calculator and see what comes out, as well as host them on the website that TNC has built that's kind of like an interactive map. So Bronwyn or Kirk, if you're here and want to say anything more about that, let me know. Cool. So otherwise the data will, oh, go ahead. No. Otherwise the data will be public and usable to everyone here and everyone who wants to use it. The last thing that we have is that final bullet point there, which is our final report. So we're iterating with TNC right now to kind of finalize that. And then we expect that to be available as well for review and for using. We also hope to have a publication to come out of this work. That will be kind of the next later step. Great. So if you want to go next. Okay, I'm going to try your audio again for the workflow.
Yeah, let me know if it's still not good. Hopefully y'all can hear me now.
It's still
So
choppy.
It's still choppy.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be better if, or would you be willing to share, Laura, your screen?
Sure. All righty. Okay, go for it.
All right. Hopefully this is a little better. Our modeling approach to generate these data sets basically involves three main steps. I'm going to kind of cover them at a high level, and then we can.
Sorry, Mustafa, it's still not better. So I think I can just keep going. Maybe rejoining, I'm not sure, but.
Yeah, Mustafa, it might be helpful if you disconnect and rejoin, and maybe a better connection will establish.
I'll try that.
Sorry, everyone. Okay, I'm gonna channel Mustafa and give this overview of the workflow. But essentially, and I think folks have been kind of following this work for a couple of years now. We've had different phases, and all of that work was building up to this point, which is to be able to train a model, unimpaired flows model and actual flows model over the whole country, and then work our way into getting down to reach scale predictions. So that's kind of the overview of just, we've started working together with TNC many years ago. And then this work is the final putting everything together to have these predictions across the whole state. All right, Mustafa, you want to give it another go?
Sure. Hopefully third time's a charm. So yeah, is it still choppy?
Yeah, still choppy. All right, so I'll just keep going. So essentially what we did was train base models, and for a machine learning type model, a base model, the goal of it is to teach the model basic hydrology, like principles of hydrology that it could learn from equations, or it could learn by seeing how inputs result in an output and how that happens in many, many different diverse situations. So here we trained an unimpaired flows model. And for that model, we used only like reference gauges, ones that didn't have alteration in them. And so that taught the model like, okay, these type of elevations, this type of precip, this type of soils, et cetera, results in this kind of output. And so we trained the model across almost 500 sites in the US. And then we had a validation set of gauges that never saw the model during training, but are the ones that we're actually going to validate to see how it did. And so those are only in California, so that we made sure the model was learning California hydrology. So for the second step, we wanted to route the prediction. So if we're doing a huge area like California, we need to break up those basins into small subbasins and then tune models that learn this particular dynamics in those subbasins and rivers. So we tune these models at different training sites in California so that the model would understand how to route flow in different situations. And we did that across the state and across, well, across all of our training sites, but particularly then in the state, we have our validation set where we're testing those out. Now we want to get from a subbasin level into the reach level. And so we downscale those predictions to basically match to different reaches. And we developed a little methodology to downscale those predictions to the reach level. So that's at a high level what we did. Mustafa, anything else you'd add there? Try again.
Yeah, I would just add that basically the main advantage of the second step is that's better.
Much better. Yeah.
The main advantage of the second step is allows us to take advantage of high resolution weather and satellite imagery that we use to put into our models. So we're able to make high resolution predictions at a small sub-basin level, which when we eventually route those flows downstream, the precision and accuracy of the predictions get to be improved by that. But otherwise, yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah, maybe just at a high level then, if I can continue here. The first step, which is training the core base models, the goal of that is to essentially train a model that can learn general hydrology. So we've trained it on for the actual flows model around 1,770 sites across all of CONUS. And for the unimpaired model, around almost 500 different training sites. We're a bit more limited for the unimpaired flows model to sites that experience natural flows. So that's why that data set is a lot smaller. And what encompasses a site is essentially a location where there's a gauge and an upstream watershed that we delineate and process inputs for, and we train these models to learn to translate those inputs to a runoff contribution for that watershed. And yeah, those inputs vary from they come from many different sources, but generally they include weather inputs, some satellite imagery, and some basin characteristics. And the only other difference between the sites that are used to train these two models is the inputs to the two models as well. The actual flows model is able to learn from additional inputs that represent human impairment. Things like canals or dams within a catchment, or the amount of impervious surfaces within the catchment. So the actual flows model is able to see a little bit more of that with the hopes of it learning to represent some of these impairments. I think Laura briefly mentioned this, but just very quickly, for both of these two models, we set out a set of sites across California that is not seen by the model development stages at all, and they're only used at the very end of, once we make predictions, we look at how they compare to observations at these locations. So we'll present some results from those later on. So the reach scale predictions we're making them at the NHD reach scale level. So there's about 180,000 NHD flow lines, and we filtered down a few that are missing some of the relevant metadata and some other criteria. So in total, the final data set is about 130, I believe, 130 to 150,000 different NHD flow line segments that we're providing predictions for the full 20-year period. I'm just going to show a quick example, which is in the San Joaquin River system, of what these predictions would look like. So what you're seeing here is actually way smaller number of flow lines than we're actually providing predictions for. It's about only 30,000 on that original map. But just for visual purposes, we're going to show this is an example of where we have a gauge along the Tulum River at Grand Canyon. And what you can see in these two hydrographs, in the top one is the unimpaired flows prediction from our unimpaired flows model. And in the bottom graph is the actual flows prediction. We picked this location because we have a gauge here. And so those observations are shown in the black on the two graphs. And our predictions are in blue with confidence bounds shown in the dark and light gray. And a couple things to note here that are interesting is at this site, we consider it an unimpaired site, so natural flows. we would expect very similar, if not the same, predictions from both models, which we're roughly seeing here. They're very, very similar. And as we move downstream, we have another gauge. If you want to move to the next slide. Bro. On San Joaquin River near Vernalis, where there's human impairment affecting this site, and we would expect different flows from the two different models. And that is in fact what we're seeing. So again, in the top graph is the unimpaired flows, and the bottom is the actual flows. And one of the main things to note here is the unimpaired flows model is predicting a lot more water reaching downstream under natural conditions. And you can see that by the y-axis here, the scale is much larger, much wider than in the actual flows case. And in the actual flows model, the other main difference is that our predictions and observations almost exactly line up. And part of the reason for that is that we've set up this model in a way where if there are gauged observations, rather than routing the predictions coming out of our model, we use those gauge observations because those represent, a closer measurement to ground truth, and that's what we want to eventually travel downstream and minimize losses from prediction inaccuracies that might come out of the model. So that's represented with really accurate predictions, but also shown with the narrow confidence bounds that are on that bottom plot. Moving on, we want to quickly cover some of the takeaways we have from these two models. And so we have an idea of, where we could be most confident in the model, less confident, and also where the model's producing very good predictions that, especially compared to relative to lacking alternative data sets, we can assume that there's reasonable predictions coming out of the model. So we'll go into each of these in a bit of detail. And first, I think we'll cover, just before diving into that, this map shows the median prediction in CFS of each of these subbasins. So the median runoff contribution from each of these areas that are shown on the plot. This encompasses slightly more than what's within the California state boundary. But the main thing to note is that generally at the top of this, like in the northern half of the state, we have a lot more flows, a lot more wetter conditions. But the entire bottom half generally, or at least the bottom third, we have a median flow of about 1 CFS. That's not to say there's no flashy events, but because they're so rare, there's a lot of these sites that for most of the time are very, very low flows, if not zero flows. And so that's one thing to note as we kind of cover some of the metrics we're about to cover, because these low flows are often very difficult to measure performance against in terms of metrics. And in a lot of cases, when you do look into the hydrographs and the absolute, not relative, but absolute error, they tend to be very minuscule. So to start off with some places where we're most confident in the model, generally base flows and snowmelt driven basins, the model performs pretty well in. And you can see in maybe, actually just to explain these plots really quickly, each one of the points on these plots represents a separate site from our test set. And so these are sites that, again, the model hasn't seen in development at all, but we then made predictions at these sites and compared them to the observations at those locations. Based on the comparison between the two, we produced these metrics. And what we're showing here are bias, NSE, and RMSE, and the distribution of these sites in under different hydrologic regimes. So we're covering from intermittent rain to perennial rain, to mixed snow and rain, and snowmelt driven sites. The final split of categorization here is all flows or base flows. So in the blue box plots, we're looking at the metric calculated on the entire time series. Our model's prediction versus the raw observation. And in the orange, we're also looking at the entire time series, but we're looking at the base flows extracted from that time series. So it excludes a lot of the flashy events and high flow events. So yeah, one of the main takeaways here is that if you look at the snowmelt class, like in the bias category, we have, or in the bias plot, we have for all flows and base flows, very close to zero bias and pretty narrow box plot there. If you look over at the RMSE plot as well, the lowest normalized RMSE is in the snowmelt class. And finally, in the NSE category, or plot, sorry, we have the highest performing NSEs at these snowmelt driven sites, but we have unfortunately not a huge amount of test sites. And so one low NSE value for one low NSE site is throwing off the box plot and expanding it down to off scale. But we covered in the TAC that specific example, and it's related to what I just mentioned, which is some metrics like NSE blow up with these low flows, and that's why we're looking at a suite of metrics and not just taking the one. Yeah, we also noticed there's a bit of a trend between basin sizes and performance. So the main thing is here, we've noticed that for the handful of really large basins that we've predicted at, we have very good performance. So we can generally be pretty confident at large basins that will perform very well.
I just wanted to break it. I think there's a question in the chat about what sort of trying to explain NSE and RMSE a bit better for folks who haven't used them before. So that might be helpful for the rest of the presentation if you have a moment.
Yeah, thanks, Roland. Yeah, sorry for not discussing. NSE is the Nash Sutcliffe efficiency. It's one of the common metrics used in hydrology for assessing the performance of flow prediction. It generally will contain a measure of both correlation and it's an overall metric that's used to kind of assess how well you predict the movements of in a hydrograph, as well as the magnitude that you capture in a hydrograph. And RMSE is just the root mean squared error. So that's just measuring the difference between the model prediction and the observation at every single point, but it's squared, so it exaggerates really high flows and gives you more of a penalty for missing high flows than lower flows. Yes, thank you, Laura. NSE, the perfect score would be 1, and RMSE ideally would be 0, because you want 0 error. And an NSE of 0 is as good as the mean prediction at that site. So for an ungauged location, an NSE of 0 beats not having a gauge. Or sorry, yeah, it's the best thing you can have to not having a gauge. Yes, RMSEs in units of flow.
And I'll just hop in. I think every hydrologist has like their favorite metrics and also has there's plenty of things to critique about each of the metrics. So we had kind of a collaborative discussion at the beginning of this project to align on metrics and are presenting a suite of them so that folks can kind of use the one that they think might be best representative, but there are issues with each metric. just know that. Cool, thanks.
Yeah,
Keep the
that's-
questions coming. I have the chat open now, and I apologize I didn't have it open before. So go ahead, Mustafa.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's definitely challenging to get a single metric to really understand the model performance. So yeah, we're definitely trying to look at a suite of them and also more particularly at specific cases. Yeah, moving on. One place we're also very confident in the model in general is these large basins, like I said. However, that doesn't mean that all small basins we perform bad in. As you can see, there's a huge cluster on the bottom left here, where we have small basins, but also small normalized RMSE. So the error is small, but the basin size is also small. It's just that we don't see large basins with high error, where we do have a handful of small basins that do have high error. And those are mostly limited to sites where we fail to capture the peak flows and RMSE exaggerates the error of missing high flow events. Next slide. So yeah, another example of where we perform very well is in a perennial rain-driven basins. And so this is an example of a medium-sized perennial rain-driven basin, Arroyo Valley below Lang Canyon. And just a zoomed in 2-year plot of our predictions from dark purple in the mean to the wider confidence bounds and the lighter shades to the yellow color. And in black, you can see the observations from USGS gauge there. And they align quite closely. So generally, yeah, perennial rain-driven classes, we do pretty well in. And then where we're least confident in the model's performance and are noticing a slight poor metrics as a result of is in the lower, the southern part of the state, where we have some really small and dry basins that experience high intermittent and rain-driven events. And these tend to also be desert-dominated basins. But there's also some that we've classified as mixed snow and rain, where also in the southern half of the state, they're producing poor metrics.
Yeah, maybe I can just hop in here. The map on the left is showing basically the hydrologic regime that each of our test sites fall into. So there's 54 of them. And it was interesting, we have a few sites that you might not think are mixed snow and rain in the bottom of that state. But they apparently receive some of that behavior. And one of those sites is in Taquitz Canyon, which drains into Palm Springs. I've been hiking there, really cool place. Really dry and really steep, and gets flashy rains that can, wipe out that area, and otherwise has a base flow of about 0. So that's a challenge for the basin, especially, or for the model, especially if the basin's really small. And you can kind of see in the very bottom of that, this is just pulled from USGS, the high flow is 61 cubic feet per second, and the median flow is 2 feet per second. So those are some of the an example of some of the challenging sites for the model. Cool. Move to actual
Cool.
flows.
So yeah, moving on to actual flows, we generally have a lot of similar takeaways here. But yeah, we'll dive into them. Some of the main differences though are that we perform better below gauges because we're taking advantage of observations there, and across all flows in larger basins. Yeah, so could dive in. I think, yeah, we have the similar plots to what we had before. But what we have here, instead of bias, we have the Pearson plot on the bottom left, where you can also very clearly see the snowmelt class, which is the one on the furthest to the right on that plot, is much higher. And similarly, on the RMSE plot to the right of it, the RMSE is a lot lower. Yes, thank you, Chris. The green dotted dashed line is the perfect score for each of these metrics. So we want as close to 1 for Pearson and NSE, and as close to 0 for RMSE. So yeah, generally we're seeing the snowmelt class as close as possible, as close to the green of all the classes. Yeah, so this and generally the base flows are also we're getting slightly better performance. Particularly if you look at the normalized RMSE plot, again, because it doesn't always contain the high flow events, we're seeing the base flows consistently much lower in terms of error. So base flows across all the sites we can be pretty confident in. And like one of the early examples I showed, below gauges, this model is very confident and accurate because it's taken advantage of gauges that are upstream to route the flows downstream. So this is an example at Tulum River again, where you can see the confidence bounds are all very, very narrow, and you can almost not distinguish very, very easily the observations from the mean prediction.
Mustafa, there was a question in the chat from Norman Johns about how you normalize the RMSE.
Yeah, we normalize by the site's mean flow. And the reason we do that is because RMSE at all these different sites would be very, very hard to compare. So we're normalizing it so that it's a bit more comparable and they can be on the same scale. So here, yeah, we have an example of where we have the lowest confidence in our actual flows model. And it's in highly intermittent and rain-driven basins, mostly in the southern part of the state. The other location is directly below dams, which we'll look at an example of. But this map shows essentially where all our actual flows evaluation sites are, and the colors of are representative of the root mean squared error. So the lighter the color, the worse the model prediction is in terms of RMSE. And again, you can see in the top half of the state, we perform fairly well, where in much wetter conditions. But again, it's difficult to go with any one metric because normalizing RMSE, you can get a high root mean squared error at a site with low flows that gets exaggerated from a few flashy events, and that can increase the RMSE quite drastically, where for most of the time we might be predicting very well at some of these locations. And particularly, I think that's captured with the low, the better metrics when we look at the base flows at these sites. And then finally, a place where the model definitely will struggle a little bit is directly below regulated dams before reaching another USGS gauge. So this is an example of a highly regulated dam where we can see the observations don't look natural at all in black. And our model prediction is fairly good at getting the seasonality and maybe picking up on some rain events that are happening, but it has no information about how the dam is being managed and the flows that are actually reaching this location. So between the outlet of the dam and this location where there are observations, the model will struggle to predict well. But then anything downstream of this gauge where we actually have these observations, we can expect the model to do well because it'll use these observations to route them downstream. And yeah, this is just a summary of for the two different models where we have the most confidence, good performance, and then lower confidence in the model's predictions. I think I might have missed a couple questions, so please feel free to speak up or maybe write something else in chat. I'll continue to review, but maybe I can pass it to you, Laura, for now.
Yeah, I think there was a question about how we are accounting for unpermitted diversions or wells in the model.
That's a great question. The model, we don't account for human impairment in a super sophisticated way. We're limited by the data that we can use that's available across the CONUS sites we train on. And so what the primary data set we used was the the EPA StreamCat data set, which contains a whole bunch of different variables related to human impairment, but it doesn't actually tell you, for example, how much you know, a rerouting will take out of a basin or something like that. It'll give you an example. It'll give you, you know, maybe the amount of upstream dam storage, but it won't tell you any information about how the dam storage or releases are scheduled or anything like that. So we're basically the best we can expect the model to learn of this regulation is these high level considerations of what kind of impairment is happening. But one good thing is that we've seen it pick up on the uncertainty around some of these different types of regulation, with the confidence bounds being wider when it knows that there's something upstream. So like that last example where there's upstream dam regulation, it knows that there's upstream dam regulation, and that's part of the reason why the confidence bounds are so wide in cases like that.
And Mustafa, do you also have gauges that are used in your training data set that are actually subject to getting diversions upstream? So it could inherently be within the model, but it's not like you're subtracting out demand data or anything that, or actual diversion data, but some of those gauges may be impaired by diversions.
Exactly. Yeah, we do have a lot of those in our model. So it definitely internally the model has picked up on a lot of patterns related to different types of diversions or flow regulation.
Yeah. So then I guess that ties back to the uncertainty bounds, because it knows that there's something else going on in this gauge. We don't have the exact data, but the uncertainty will be higher.
Exactly. Yeah. Great point.
Maybe following up on that, there's a question about wastewater or return flow. And yeah, in some of the smaller, definitely urban catchments, that return flow is significant. Totally agree. I think to the extent that the model has, and Mustafa, you can pick up, but to the extent that the model has gauges that are able to capture that, then the model will pick up on that. But you know, we're not including wastewater specific information to train the model.
There was also a question, it was just within the chat, on when the data will be available, and Bronwyn said that it's going to be accessible by the end of 2025, and they're going to share it out with this group when it's ready.
Yeah, exciting.
Oh, great.
Other questions?
yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, y'all, oh yeah, we had one more slide about just challenges. You know, this project was like, there are a lot of different things that impact hydrology as y'all are bringing up. And so, you know, having more information about reservoir storage operations, doing a little bit more work on what we call our base model to help route those really small basin flows, and then having more weather information are the things that we've identified for improving predictions. But I'm just going to put here quickly our emails. If you have any questions or want to follow up, you know, feel free to do that, and we'll send the presentation along to pass around if folks are interested. So Thanks so much for having us, and thanks, Chris, for moderating.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is really exciting. I see Lisa Hunt has her hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was really interesting work, and I think will be very valuable for many purposes. I'm curious, since it's a statistical model rather than a mechanistic model for looking into the future in terms of trying to use it to help figure out how, for example, changes in reservoir operations could improve environmental flows in particular basins. I'm curious how you see that working, if it could be used for that purposes, since those, like the reservoir operations rules, wouldn't be built into the model mechanistically. Could it be coupled with more mechanistic modeling, or yeah, I'm curious how you see that could work.
Yeah, I can take a first stab at that. I think exactly what you're alluding to, like we can provide a natural flow forecast that would give the inflows into the reservoir. And then there are, these reservoir optimization or operations models that you can run different scenarios and put the rules in that way and kind of alter them. But that you could actually use our unimpaired flows predictions, Mustafa, correct me if I'm wrong, to do exactly that, because they would be not taking into account any of the current rules or things that are happening with the reservoir.
But then in terms of the downstream flows, that would depend on the reservoir operations, right? So I'm thinking of a situation where that the operation rules could be changed to try to improve environmental flows, and how this model could be used for looking at like how the downstream flows would change.
Yeah, so then we would it would be kind of a thing we'd have to do as an add-on, or like we couldn't use what's already being made by the data set, but we would then take those outflows that are coming through from the scenarios of the reservoir operations or mechanistic model, as you call it, and we would route those downstream, is how I could see that working.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks again, everyone, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Laura and Mustafa. That was really great. Really exciting new data sets that are coming along live soon. And I know this has been a challenging issue across the state because we have a lot of gauges, but we don't have gauges everywhere. And so this is going to be a really important data set to help fill critical gaps. Okay, well, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I think that's okay. I can move on to the next item so that we have a couple of staff-related updates. And so I'm going to be giving you a little overview of a new grant that is being recently funded by California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Cannabis Restoration Grant Program. And then I'll hand it over to Sarah Yarnell, who's going to talk about a conference, the International Society of River Science Conference that's going to be held at UC Davis coming up. So let me share my screen. Okay, so like I said, we're really excited to advance and start to operationalize the California Environmental Flows Framework to inform sustainable cannabis water use practices and policies, and also a wide range of other management applications. So I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of this newly funded project, but I just want to note that this is a collaboration with a broad set of other organizations. You can see all the different logos on here, and organizations and agencies that are going to be working together on this. So just a quick roadmap. I I'm going to give a brief overview of SEF for those of you who are new here or may not be familiar. I'll jump into the project goals and a high-level overview of some of the key components of this new project, and then we should have some extra time for questions. So the California Environmental Flows Framework, also known as SEF, has really been a key product of the California Environmental Flows Workgroup, so this work group. And so the first couple of years since the EFLOS Workgroup was started, we worked on kind of developing this consistent statewide technical guidance that really is to provide managers with a way to develop scientifically defensible environmental flow recommendations following a functional flows approach. And so there are multiple different methods and tools and models that could be used to quantify and identify environmental flow ranges. And so this was a way for a bunch of different agencies, organizations to come together to develop this consistent statewide framework called SEF. And it's a really exciting time because we've been currently implementing this framework across several statewide programs, different to inform different policies, and also across a wide range of management applications. And SEF is really based on a functional flows approach, which means that we're honing in on key components of the annual hydrograph that provide a distinct geomorphic, ecologic, or biogeochemical function. So rather than having our management goal focused on mimicking unnatural conditions across the entire year, which we know is really hard to do in practice, let's hone in and focus on these key components across a given water year that are providing the most ecological function and the most benefit to the stream ecosystem as a whole. And so in California, we've identified 5 key functional flow components: the fall pulse flows, wet season peak flows, wet season base flows, spring recession flow, and the dry season base flow. And so all of these functional flows are really supposed to be reflective of natural patterns that occur in space. So you could see how all these different flow components overlay or inundate different parts of a stream channel, and they provide different functions across different times of the year. And then they're also reflective of natural patterns across time. So it's not just one static minimum flow, but a range of flows that represent the timing, duration, magnitude, rate of change, all of which are important to the stream ecosystem. And so SEF really moves the ball forward. It provides tools and data to identify protective flow ranges for all stream reaches across the state. And so we have statewide models, and we have a data set of the natural flow ranges of all the functional flow metrics across the entire state that's available on the natural flows database. And we also provide a structured approach if you're at a site where you have local considerations, local constraints, where you may need to refine those functional flow ranges. So there's a structured approach and steps to how do you actually refine that based on local considerations. And then it also provides a process for evaluating not only the ecological demands for water, but the human considerations as well, and ultimately come up with balanced environmental flow recommendations that consider all uses of water that are important. And then because this was agreed upon approach, it's been co-developed by multiple agencies, and many of you that are here today within this work group. It's a nice resource, tools, and data set that that many agencies and different groups are already using on the ground. And so now we have this framework, we have a set of models and tools, and a number of different entities are actually using SEF for a variety of different management applications. So these are a couple of examples where SEF is currently or has been applied. That could be dam operations, in-stream flow, and channel restoration projects, projects focused on urban runoff provisions of dry weather flows from some of the storm drains through the MS4, wastewater change petitions, groundwater planning. And so there's all these different types of applications, different organizations and agencies that are using the framework to date. But that being said, we really don't, we haven't done a formal synthesis of all the lessons learned, and we haven't really gotten a chance to use those lessons learned to improve the framework, improve some of the statewide tools that we've developed, and ultimately develop implementation guidance that would help make it a lot easier to actually apply the framework across all different types of applications in the state. And so that's where this this new grant came into play. So this again is through the CDFW Cannabis Restoration Grant Program. And I will say that a lot of the key areas that we're focusing on have been actually vetted through this work group. So a couple years back, we developed a implementation guidance where we highlighted kind of these key technical challenges and key next steps to really help operationalize CEF and improve the tools, improve implementation in education and outreach. And so we took some of those main components in addition to feedback from the State Water Board and Fish and Wildlife on kind of what are some of the challenging areas that we should focus on. And so that's kind of what motivated us to submit this proposal. And so for this new grant, there's kind of three key areas that we're working on. One is improving and refining and developing tools to improve our ability to predict flows for fish and wildlife. The next one is really understanding and tracking implementation of environmental flow requirements and assessing if these flow requirements are we actually achieving those flows on the ground based on observational data? And then the last piece is implementation guidance, synthesizing the lessons learned from case studies and then developing outreach materials and hosting a suite of workshops and educational presentations to practitioners and agency staff. So I have a couple of slides that'll go into a little bit more detail, but happy to answer any questions. So this in total was about $2 million funded across a wide range of organizations that are collaborating on this. And it's a 3-year project. And so really excited to get started on this, hopefully sometime either this month or next month. And so the first piece is we really, based on some of our initial case studies and lessons learned, we want to improve the models to help us predict flows for fish and wildlife. So we've developed these statewide models that are really great at predicting stream flow and functional flows for many of the streams across the state. But as you've seen with the upstream tech presentation, it's really hard to model and predict flows that in streams that are flashy, ephemeral, that go from these zero flows essentially across most of the year to really flash flood events. And so we're hoping to fine tune and refine our models and the calculator to better predict these flashy and intermittent rivers across the state. We're also hoping to integrate some deep learning models and algorithms to help refine the statewide functional flow model predictions. And then a second piece is that we know that a lot of the streams across the state have strong interactions with groundwater and groundwater management, especially as it relates to cannabis cultivation. And so the second piece is really trying to refine and develop models to get a better handle on quantifying groundwater depletion effects on surface flows. So we're going to be identifying a case study where we can kind of test and pilot some of these new modeling tools to do that. And then the last piece is we know that changes in flow can impact key water quality parameters like stream temperature, DO. And so we're going to focus on developing some tools and approaches to really link changes in stream flow to changes in water quality, and ultimately to changes in the stream ecosystem. And so we're going to be piloting and testing some tools to do that as well. But ultimately, what we want to know is what's happening on the ground. So building off of the work from the State Water Board, where they developed this really nice dashboard that shows different environmental flow requirements that have been set across the state, we want to kind of take this dashboard that kind of links to different PDFs, different documents, legal documents, quantify what are the actual flow requirements that have been set across the state, and then where data is available, either through gauges or other observed data, we want to see if in these areas, are we actually achieving those flow requirements? So ultimately tracking implementation of flow projects and successes and failures across the state. And then the last piece is focusing on better training tools for agencies and the practitioner communities to make it easier to use the framework and the tools that we're developing. So what do we learn from the case studies? And then from those lessons learned, let's provide some guidance on how to actually implement stuff for various applications across the state. And then the last piece, which is a really big component of this, is training and outreach materials for agency staff and practitioners. And so we're really excited to focus on, the outreach and education component. And then lastly, there's a lot of opportunity for interaction with this environmental flows work group. And we're envisioning that we'll be giving a lot of presentations, giving updates, and also opportunities for you all to provide important feedback on the different elements of this project. So we're hoping to use this work group as kind of a forum for discussion. And then there may be potential, I mentioned earlier that we're going to be piloting some of the new modeling tools at a couple of case studies. And so there may be some of you interested in collaborating on some of these case studies, building off of some of the tools that we're planning on developing and testing in different areas. And then lastly, a big component of this, as I mentioned earlier, is training and outreach. And so we're going to be developing outreach materials. We're going to be hosting a suite of workshops to help make it easier and kind of translate some of the technical tools into the hands of the end users, which is many of you as well. So really excited to really advance the next set of work on the California Environmental Flows Framework. And one thing that I forgot to mention was that initially, most of the development of SEF and the statewide models have been funded by the State Water Board, Division of Water Rights, and we're really excited for this next phase of funding to be supported by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So with that, I guess we can open up to any questions. Yes, Norman.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thanks. Sorry for the stall. I got confronted with a little box to check when I turned my mic off. Anyhow, I can definitely appreciate the opportunity to refine the natural or unimpaired flows calculator that underpins SEF. But I guess a frank question here is like, are intermittent flows an issue in the areas where cannabis is grown?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes and no, maybe. I'll say, oh, okay, Ethan. Ethan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, Chris, I can take that.
I
So I work in the Office of Cannabis with CDFW, and we are monitoring the streams that have cannabis cultivation within the watershed. And a lot of these are headwater streams. So even though they're kind of in the northern part of the state, we have a lot more perennial streams. There is still a lot of cultivation like really high up in the watershed where you do get inclemency that occurs naturally, and may also be occurring because of water use from many different water users.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Thanks, Ethan. And then one thing that I will note on that question is that Bronwyn's group at TNC and UC Davis have been working on updating the functional flows calculator. So this is the calculator that we use on any stream flow time series to calculate the ranges of functional flows, whether that be gauge data or model data. And so they have already completed an updated functional flow calculator for flashy and ephemeral streams, where we know that may behave differently than some of the snowmelt or rain-driven, mixed rain-driven streams. And so we have this new functional flows calculator that's going to be readily available. And so we're going to be building off of that work that they've completed. Yeah, Angela Cook, I see your hands up.
Hi, I was wondering, do you know approximately how many streams currently have in-stream flow requirements in California?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but maybe I see there's some State Water Board folks on there. If you have the link available to your the dashboard, maybe you can pop that in the chat because they have a really nice map-based interface on a web link. And so you can go through and kind of click through and see and visualize the flow requirements across the state.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Bronwyn.
Yeah, I guess maybe just to add to that, I think we're not aware of a really comprehensive assessment of all of the places that have existing in-stream flow protections. That synthesis was specifically focused on the time of year that the cannabis policy applies to in the summer. And I think there's probably other types of regulations that aren't there. And that's actually a big reason we're doing that synthesis as part of this grant. I will say that just looking at the streams that are in that map, I think we've calculated it's something like 10% of river miles across the state have some type of flow protection if you just treat all river miles equally. But I think that's probably not the full picture.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, so we're going to be building off of the State Water Board's dashboard, but then we're also going to be, the first step is kind of doing a deep dive of other documents and flow requirements that may not be in there or that are new, that haven't been captured in that dashboard. Oh, thanks, Bronwyn. So I see she put a link to the existing flow requirement dashboard. Any other questions? And so this won't be the last time that you'll hear from us. We're envisioning once we kick off the project, we'll have another meeting, and then as we go through on different elements of the project, we'll keep everyone up to date and informed. And we're really excited to interact with you all and get your feedback. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Yarnell from UC Davis. She's going to be talking about the International Society for River Science Conference that she's co-hosting.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks, Chris, and everyone. So I just wanted to essentially make an announcement and make people aware that the International Society for River Science is going to be holding their biennial symposium. They typically meet about every 2 years. here at Davis and UC Davis in October of this year. This is a group that is sort of river scientists around the world, people who work on rivers, water management, watershed management. Environmental flows, of course, is part of like one aspect of watershed management, you know, that people who basically deal with rivers around the world also deal with. So it's a great opportunity for us here in California to get to engage with a lot of the global community that has a lot of the same questions and issues that we do. It's also an opportunity for us to share and highlight the type of work that we do within our agencies, within our research, on the ground type restoration work that a lot of us do, that type of thing. So currently, I put the website link in the chat. The timeline for how this is going to play out, it's of course, it's a scientific conference. It's open for anybody to register for, to submit abstracts for. Currently, we are soliciting for special sessions. So if you or the group that you work with would like to help organize a special session around a particular topic of interest, that then you would help to try to find speakers and put together a focal topic of interest. Please, now is the time, please, in this next month, to get those session proposals over to us. There's on the website, there's just a brief blurb, and down at the bottom, there's the emails to email to if you have a special session proposal idea that you'd like to. I have asked the CEF technical team to potentially put together a special session around e-flows, although environmental flows is such a big topic. I think we'll get a lot of abstracts and just submitted on a basis anyway. I don't know that we need a particular special session, but perhaps this idea of like, you know, highlighting the framework and the management of environmental flows might be a good idea. So just a comment that we're considering that as well. The special sessions we're soliciting those this month. Abstracts will open at the very end of this month, or probably more realistically the first week of March. At that time, anybody can come in and just submit an abstract around any of the key themes. If you're part of a special session and you've been asked to submit an abstract for that special session, you would just indicate that special session that your abstract is part of. There's no fee to submitting an abstract. We'll review abstracts. Abstracts will be open from essentially the first week of March through probably mid-April. So over the about a 6-week time period there. We'll close abstract submissions, review those abstracts, let people know their abstracts have been selected, and then registration for the conference will open soon after. So also likely in April. Early bird registration will be open until probably early August, early to mid-August, where you'll get a reduced rate if you register early, and then registration for the conference either day of only or for the whole week will be available all the way through the conference in October. You'll just pay a little bit of a higher rate if you need to or choose to register after that early bird registration date. For this conference with this group is typically set up where it's going to be a week. So it'll be that week of October 6th through 10th. There'll be a Sunday evening sort of welcome reception, probably at a local, I don't know, pub or something around here, bar, brewery here in Davis to kind of welcome people. We'll have parallel, every morning will begin with kind of a plenary session. There'll be parallel sessions throughout the day, Monday, Tuesday. We're hoping we can provide lunch in the registration cost, but that'll kind of be determined on evening. There'll be a poster session. Wednesday, we do local field trips in the area, as you know, some of which will be just part of your registration fee. Some will have an opportunity to pay a little bit extra to perhaps go a little farther, do something a little bit more elaborate. Thursday, Friday will be parallel sessions again, with the conference ending kind of midday Friday, or mid-afternoon Friday, I should say. And then Thursday night, there's typically a conference banquet dinner, which gives an opportunity for everybody to come together. This conference is pretty small. It's usually a couple hundred people. So it's a really nice opportunity to just talk and get to know people. Unlike some of the really big conferences where you feel like you're like lost among the crowds, it's a nice sort of smaller, more intimate group. We're hoping the cost for the early bird registration for the whole week will be on the order of $700 to $750 for the week. So kind of in line with what, you know, for example, AFS recently was, or what AGU is. And then it'll be a little bit higher, probably about $100 higher for the later registration. And then there'll also be an opportunity for day registrations only if you only come for a certain day. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's any other information. Does anybody have any questions I can answer about the conference, I just really encourage folks to attend. It's kind of a unique opportunity. This society has not been to the United States, the West Coast of the United States ever. And last time they were in the US was back in 2015, and this group met in Wisconsin. So it's a nice opportunity for all of us. Yeah, any questions or any other information I can provide? Norman, yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. I have not heard of, to be frank with you, this particular society. Are they, is it largely European practitioners or Australian, or how would you characterize
kind of all
it?
of the above. If you're familiar with the journal River Research and Applications, RRA is the scientific publication journal. This is the society that manages that journal. So this is why it's kind of a smaller group. So it's typically it's global: Europeans, Australians, New Zealanders, US, Canada, Japan, some of my and Japanese colleagues, some Chinese colleagues, Chilean, definitely South African. So kind of, I think it originally started, RRA as a journal, started about 25 years ago out of the UK. So I think this group sort of spawned from there, but over the last couple decades, it's expanded to be quite global. And they have a focus on rivers and watershed management. So it tends to be a little bit of a smaller subset than, for example, what you might see in the international IAHR. So that's a much bigger group. That's just a hydrologic research group. International Association of Hydrologic Research, I think, is what IAHR is. And that's largely a European sort of scientific community as well. I started going to this society kind of back actually about 15 years ago. And I just was I was kind of like, oh, here's where all the people who do what I do come outside of California, basically. So it was a nice opportunity to learn and hear from. And the Australians are a big part of this group. So a lot of the Murray-Darling Basin work, a lot of our colleagues related to environmental flow work in particular, are sort of a large part of this group and community as well. So yeah, but good question. It's not as large as some of the bigger, and because it's more international, I think there are a fair number of Americans who are not as familiar with it. Yeah, any other questions or anything I can provide?
Sarah, what did you say registration is coming on?
Registration is going to open probably in late April. It will be open all the way through the conference. It's just that the early bird prices of registration will probably close sometime midsummer. And then if you want to register after that, you can. You're just going to pay a slightly higher rate. And then abstracts, if you would like to present a poster or present a talk, those abstracts will open here at the end of the month, maybe first week of March, maybe March 1st, something like that. And they will be open until mid-April for abstract submission if you'd like to present or talk. And there's no fee to submit an abstract, just the registration fee. So. And if there's any group also, we're also looking at sponsorships. If there's any group that would like to be more involved with the planning of the conference, or perhaps, a field trip, if you're a group that, for example, you might be interested in helping to support a field trip option to take people out to a restoration site or something of interest, please reach out to me directly, or reach out to the conference organizers on that email, because we're very much still in the planning phases. So very open to ideas and help from anybody who'd like to be a little bit more involved than just like showing up or submitting an abstract. So, okay. Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me separately too if you have any additional questions. I'm happy to chat about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
Yep, thanks.
Cool. Well, I guess if there aren't any more questions, we can move on to the next item. So as you all know, Dan Schultz, he is the chair of the EFOS work group. He's not here today because he's sick, but he was going to announce that he is stepping down from his position as the chair of the EFOS work group. And so we're going to be looking for anyone who wants to either nominate or volunteer someone to serve as the chair and the co-chair. And so if you have anyone in mind, feel free to send an email to Dan, or also we can kind of open up discussion right now. I know we're kind of ahead of schedule too. And then I think the idea was that we were gonna, Dan was gonna look at some of the recommendations, and then we can open up the discussion on kind of voting for a new chair and co-chair at the next eFlows meeting, which I think is in 3 or 4 months from now. Any questions or any nominations or recommendations? Okay, so Valerie put Dan's email in the chat. So daniel.schultz@waterboard.ca.gov. So yeah, please feel free to send any chair nominations to Dan. Yeah, so I guess we'll have that as the next meeting's agenda item. I just wanted to give a shout out. I know Dan isn't here, but he's done a really amazing job leading this work group and really facilitating the meetings and having really unique presentations and updates. So kudos to him. We can all give him our kudos maybe at the next meeting when he's actually here. Okay, well, so I guess we'll circle back on that on the next eFlows meeting. So other than that, I guess the next item would be our roundtable update. So we can, if anyone has any updates that you want to report, feel free to raise your hand, and then we can go ahead and go through that. No updates? Okay. So with that, are there any topics or agenda items that this group wants to prioritize for our next meeting? We typically have like 1 or 2 presentations, and then we'll for sure talk about recommendations for a chair and a co-chair. Any other items or topics that people are dying to discuss? Okay, well, if anyone has any presenters or anything that they want to give an update on formally in the next meeting, feel free to also email Dan, and we can get you on the agenda. So with that, thank you for everyone attending this meeting, and thanks to the Upstream Tech Group for your update on the modeling and the outputs.
Thanks, Chris, for being our pinch hitter today.
You're welcome. Yeah, no problem. Okay, see everyone next meeting. Bye.